May 28th, 2015, the Ochelli Effect is live on UCY.TV radio. Thank you for deciding to tune in, utilizing your fondle slab of choice, using your applicable application of choice. Thanks. Do appreciate it. Of course, we are, we are sort of at home at ucy.tv/TOE, and this is one of those nights. I'll tell you, it throws me off a little bit because the introduction to the show is a lot louder and more obnoxious in my headphones than it is for you guys. So think about that for a minute when you want to complain about it. Anyway, tonight what we're going to do is in the series with the whole, JFK myths, getting rid of the assassination myths. We have mainly attacked all of the really bad, not all. Let me correct myself real quick. It is endless, the amount of bad conspiracy stuff out there. But tonight, we're going to start off focusing on the problem with the alleged official story. So everybody can stop complaining that all I did was attack other conspiracy theory type oriented individuals. Now we're going to do it the other way. And there's a reason for it. Of course, the myths do wind up coming fast and furious from all sides. So let's try and get some things straight. And I got some really interesting guys to do this with me tonight. And I'm real happy because, first of all, I've got, anybody who listens to my show regularly knows Carmine Savastano from Neapolis Media Group. How you doing tonight, Carmine?
Pretty good, Chuck. How are you doing tonight?
All right. And, of course, This makes me especially happy. I got Rob Clark with us from the Lone Gunman podcast. How you doing, brother?
Good, Chuck. How are you?
All right. And we're going to add Charles Cliff in just a moment. I got to grab him myself. But we're going to add Charles Cliff, and this makes it a very interesting roundtable, gentlemen. So, real happy about this. Let's see now. And the blind guy fiddles with the Skype. Let's see if Charles is there. All right. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, we can begin to move forward, and Charles can add in at a later time. So, guys, like I said, we've been through this. Carmine and I, anyway, have been through this a lot. And, of course, this is what you spend a lot of time on, Rob, is debunking the conspiracy-oriented stuff. But we're going to start off with the alleged official story. So let's give everybody kind of an idea what that is to start with, right? This is the Oswald is the Lone Gunman, which, again, the more I think about the name of your podcast, brother, the more I like it. Because you are the lone...
different meanings.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying it's got many different meanings.
Exactly. That's the thing, is depending on your mood, it can go in a lot of different directions. But see, that's the whole thing, is when it comes to the first official explanation, because realize there's actually two official government explanations for the JFK assassination. One being that we have a lone gunman, a lone assassin, a lone nut, and the other being we do still have a lone nut, but he probably didn't do it alone. Kind of two different meanings, but we're going to focus on the whole Oswald acting alone, absolutely kind of thing tonight. Oh boy. And Charles, you're with us now?
I am with you, yes.
Ah, Charles Cliff. Good. All right. Now we've got the four, which is what I wanted. All right. So let's break it down for everybody. Look, here's the deal. Right, you've got Oswald, who is in the book depository, who allegedly fires 3 shots, who scores at least 2 shots on Kennedy, killing him, wounding Governor Connolly, then fleeing from the scene, and allegedly killing Officer J.D. Tippit. This is the guy that they arrested a little while later in a movie theater after he fled the scene, went and retrieved a handgun, and there's a whole lot of details in between, and I'm sure that anybody who wants to familiarize themselves with this can, just go to their on-demand services with their cable company and probably find something from the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, or online or wherever else, and you'll find the whole Oswald lone nut scenario played out 100 different ways. Am I correct, guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's always no shortage of people who want to tell you that's what happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But we're going to kind of reverse engineer this a little bit. Okay? Let's just imagine for a moment that, we're coming into this completely uneducated and we want to start to assemble. Start to assemble what you might do. And what's the typical thing they talk about with a criminal case where you have a murder, you have a wounding, you have an assassination of a human being in broad daylight. But, what is it that they would do? Well, they'd first come up with a suspect and they would, end up by investigating other aspects of the crime. They would lead themselves to a suspect, and then when they want to prosecute them, they would, which Oswald was never actually prosecuted, special note for the uneducated out there, but, oh boy, convicted in the public's mind, convicted by the Warren Commission, in absentia, posthumously, whatever, right? Let's begin with the whole theory of what's means, motive and opportunity. We always hear that phrase, don't we?
I want to make sure to give the other gentleman a chance to talk. I'll talk the whole episode if we can.
Well, right. I mean, Rob, I want to hear your commentary on this because, like I said, Carmine's been on. We could go back and forth and just do this ourselves, but I want to get your commentary on this.
Well, the first thing I'll address is motive. That's a big problem for lone nutters, and it was a big problem for the Warren Commission. I had a couple of lone nutters on the show, and none of them had a very good answer when I asked them, what could possibly be the motive? And none of them has come up with a very good answer. And neither did the Warren Commission.
Well, yeah, isn't that the reality, is that even the Warren Commission themselves could not properly demonstrate a motive for Oswald. There is no proper motive. There's sort of a generalized understanding that he's supposed to be, a communist, somebody who is a red-type sympathizer, and that's really commensurate with the time, because that was easy to sort of seize upon public opinion and say, yeah, that guy's guilty and whatever else. But the reality is even the Warren Commission doesn't present a clear motive for the crime, do they?
No, I don't think they do. I agree with Rob and what you said, and I'm sure Charles has something to say about it as well. When once Charles says something about it, I have a document I want to offer that I think exhibits their entire lack of motive, even internally, that they were discussing.
Right. So, Charles, what do you think about Oswald's motive, the fact that the Warren Commission has none, and the fact that, generally speaking, there's not really even a clear motive among those who want to insist that we're all crazy when we say this can't be the correct story.
When you go into a court of law, They say the three most important things in proving a crime is means, motive, and opportunity. And in most courts of law, 2 out of 3 just isn't enough. They want you to establish all 3. And in this case, it has never once been established what the motive is. And they kind of had it evolving, the Warren Commission. At one point, he was a communist. At another point, he was a lone nut that wanted to be famous. There's this, there's that, there's everything, but they never nailed it down. And because every time they try and do one of these things, saying either he's a lone nut or a commie or whatnot, other conflicting evidence comes up to, kind of disprove that. So that's really the biggest flaw in the whole case against him, is that motive was never, and to this day, has never been properly ever established.
Right. So those that sort of buy into the story, support it, and publicly continue to produce, documentaries, books, et cetera, on the case, that want to insist that he's the absolute lone assassin, what they wind up settling for is an amalgamation of all of these fragmentary sort of motives that never actually pan out.
Yeah,
I mean, wouldn't you say that's about accurate?
I was going to say, yeah, and they use bits and pieces of each one to try and put them all together and say this is a motive. Well, if you have different pieces of a few different puzzles, they're not going to fit together. They're going to come up with some mishmash that doesn't make any sense, and this is what you got here.
Right. I mean, they tried to paint him as a lone nut, a crazy person, a violent person. They went into his history, his past, his upbringing, his mother, his relationship with Marina, supposedly, and in order to paint him as this crazy person that was capable of just one day waking up and deciding he was going to shoot the president.
And on that note,
Right. I knew Carmine was going to come.
Which I think that Rob introduced the supposed crazy person idea, which is one that people like to bandy about. And I want to go into a file from Arthur Dooley, who was supposedly the Oswald internal specialist at the CIA and was involved in a lot of the file handling of Oswald. And some of the files never got back from Dooley, according to some of the other files. But Dooley states, at your request, I have reviewed approximately 100 FBI, Secret Service, Dallas Police, and State Department reports relative to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and I have examined a large volume of related matter, including Lee Oswald's writings. Some of the FBI reports contain hundreds of pages. Now, let me stop for a second. I would guarantee that all of us talking right now have read as much as Dooley. In fact, I'll contend that I've read a lot more than Dooley, if this is all he's read. Mm-hmm. But this is what Dooley gets from it. All of the available evidence points to a solitary act of a mentally unstable person. What triggered him off has not been determined and more than likely never will be resolved. So we're not going to have a motive, is basically what he's saying. We don't need one. We can't put one together with the evidence we got, so, whatever. He did it, is basically the overall message.
Yeah, he's just kooky. And based on what sort of, expert opinion he's offering here is pretty interesting, because taking a look at those files, what it is that he, claims he looked through, which, the available evidence I understand would be limited, etc. But I mean, the reality here is that you don't have a portrait of a really unstable guy from what they had in their hands that we know of, right?
No.
What you have is a guy who's, a little bit haphazard in the way he conducts his life, doesn't seem to have a direction. He's sort of rudderless as a person in a lot of places and gets himself into mischief for, making statements and doing things that he's not supposed to. I mean, I love the fact that, and I don't even know if they had possession of his full military records when they made that evaluation.
I don't think so. This is 64, so this is right during the commission.
Yeah, and the thing is, a whole lot of that stuff, they were working with limited files, and I know a lot of people make that excuse about the Warren Commission's conclusions, but, fragmentary evidence still is not enough to create this, like I said, this amalgamated motive. You have, inconclusive results about his psychology based on his history. And meanwhile, these aren't even psychologists that are studying it. I'm not saying that they didn't do that at some point, but a whole lot of people are passing judgment on this guy's psychology, who was only 24 years of age, who really hadn't quite picked out a direction in life. I mean, we're talking about a guy who signed up, went into the Marine Corps, and then, immediately leaving on a hardship discharge, goes and, shows up in Russia on a tourist visa, decides to defect over there, stays there for a couple of years, comes back with a Russian wife and a baby where he's got a dysfunctional relationship, and almost anybody would agree on this. From any side of the spectrum would agree on that characterization of that point in his life, and I basically just described his entire adulthood. I mean, unless you guys think I'm crazy here.
Well, I always found one of the ridiculous things is that they tried to use the fact that he had a truancy problem when he was in school as evidence of criminal behavior or the evidence of a criminal in the making. Because he didn't want to go to class? What school student isn't truant from time to time? That's not the kind of evidence.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of character assassination with little actual evidence. I mean, if they wanted to make criminal connections, which they could have, they just didn't want to, they could have gone back to his youth in Exchange Alley under Marcello's territory, where Dutz got hooked up with Sam Saya, and Sam Saya worked for Marcello. So.
Oh, right. But this is the thing. You don't have a lot to judge, what we're talking about here. His truancy issue is a ridiculous point. I mean, there was plenty of kids that were truant. I mean, I had truancy issues. I've never been convicted as an adult of any crime.
Like Scarface, never convicted.
He had to go there. Rob, is there anything you want to add to this? Because, I mean, I'm so tired of having to beat down the crazy kid Oswald thing. I'm really, at the point of going, are we really having to go through this once more? How do you feel about it?
Well, I just want to add that, they always wanted to paint him as a loner. And it's evident throughout his life, he had friends in school. He had friends in the Marine Corps. He had a lot of friends in Russia. And he was always around family, growing up. But maybe not immediate family. Maybe he didn't always have a father around. Maybe his mother was working. He really didn't have a lot of direction when he was in his, I'd say, early teens, till the time he went to the Marine Corps. And as we know from photo evidence, he joined the Civil Air Patrol, and maybe he got some guidance from, men, or various other places. But that's typical. That's typical of any kid. I mean, growing up, without a father in his life, and a mother who's working all the time trying to support their family. And you got to figure by this time his brothers are gone. When Oswald's in his early teens, so his main goal is to get out of that house and get in the Marine Corps as soon as possible. He's really not worried about school at that point.
Right. John Pick and Robert Oswald are gone, so they can't exactly be the great surrogate father figure for him. If we were to claim that he even required one, which he might have, that might explain some of his sort of actions regarding how he decided to socialize. But he was not antisocial. He was not an isolationist. This is clear just by the records they have in their own hands. So, to say that he was just this isolated sort of individual who was constantly seeking to be alone, constantly seeking solitude, this is a ridiculous point,
Yeah. I think that entire scenario is twisted by the fringe of each side. You've got the fringe people... You've got the fringe people on one side saying that he was this madman who did all these crazy things, and then you've got the fringe on the other side who want to defend him, saying that he was totally innocent, that he was a super spy, which we know isn't true because he shot himself. That's how he got his first court-martial.
Yeah.
This isn't the genius gunman that they try to prop up.
Yeah. people that want to Photoshop them into pictures with puppies and things like that.
Exactly.
They turn around and paint this picture of a James Bond, soft-hearted, sort of progressive, liberal, very deep, and honestly, I don't get that impression from most of the people that I can prove knew him. But okay,
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, it's kind of like JFK. I know that people will give me flack for this, but whatever. They say that I can be too cold in my analysis, but that's how you have to be. You're not supposed to put any of these people on a pedestal, whether it's JFK or Oswald or Allen Dulles. They're all people. They all have flaws. They've all done bad things. No one is completely innocent. No one is completely guilty unless the evidence puts us there.
Yeah, and people far too often they involve it, themselves emotionally. But when you're going into a case like this, where you're looking at it and trying to find answers, you can't be emotional about it. You've got to just go with what the evidence says and just follow through with it. Emotion's got nothing to do with it.
Right.
And I'd also like to point out, when it comes to the motive, with what Oswald was doing in New Orleans, before the assassination, with his defection, they could have easily used that, painted him as a communist, Marxist, or a pro-Castro guy, acting on behalf of Castro, and then they would have had a motive. Okay, but they chose not to go that route. They chose not to pursue that. They instead painted him as a lone nut with no motive.
Well, they started with that scenario internally with the whole Mexico City thing, which, in my estimation, the entire Mexico City episode is wholly suspect. You have the CIA who's surveilling, two particular installations, which, by the way, a consulate and an embassy are two different things. But anyway, saying that they were surveilling this place constantly under photographic surveillance, yet we have no legitimate photographic evidence for it. When you trace back looking at all that stuff, I mean, they sort of started to go with that scenario, but I mean, it was even far too ridiculous for them to really embrace,
Yeah, well, none of the things line up. I mean, all of the supposed Oswald appearances are not congruent to Lee Harvey Oswald, whether it's Duran's red-faced, short, blonde-haired man, or it's Alvarado's tale, or, no one saw him actually there that can be trusted, that has consistent testimony. Everything that happens, the phone call that Winston Scott tried to remind everyone in the CIA about that was in Spanish, which Oswald didn't speak, was using the name Oswald. None of the wiretaps they had in the consulates or the embassies picked him up. Nobody, Oswald's voice was never 100% identified and shown publicly.
Right.
So I don't think they had it. They didn't have pictures of him. He might have went to Mexico, I'll go with that, but I don't think he ever went to one of those two consulates or embassies.
Yeah, right.
The whole thing, too, about the no pictures, one of the reasons they tried to give, there was no pictures, because the camera was broken. So part of the problem is, the camera may have been broken, but they had multiple cameras. So you're telling me that every camera they had there was broken all at the same time on the same day, and this happens to just occur when Oswald is there? That doesn't make it. There's no way. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, so I do believe, gentlemen, we've completely disposed of the motive. But, and Charles does make a great point here regarding this, because, they really want you to have all three of these to convict him. And again, I don't state that means he's absolutely innocent. Oh, no, I'm not one of these guys. I'm just saying that to solely convict him as the lone assassin is a problem. And that brings us to our next sort of part of the equation. We'll leave motive aside. We'll just assume for a moment that there was a motive, but it can't be ascertained. Let's just try that in our minds for a minute, even though it seems really ridiculous. Okay. How about means, guys? So the means to carry out the assassination.
Well, would you say that I should wait for the 72 for opportunity?
Okay. I believe that fits under opportunity.
Yeah, okay, I'll wait for opportunity. I'll let you guys go. I'll try to think. Besides the gun, the problem with the gun that we all know, of course.
Well, the problem? How many problems do you want?
Yeah. Well, you got the rusty firing pin. You've got the fact that it's a remodeled former Italian World War II rifle that was sold as surplus. You've got the fact that some of those that were modified in the lot blew up in the hands and killed 3 different owners, which is why there was a suit going on between the supplier and the distributor.
Nice list to start off with. Rob, you want to add?
Well, there's the whole problem of actually getting this gun traced back to Oswald as being the one that he supposedly ordered in the first place. There's problems with, the model of the gun that he supposedly ordered being different from the one that he got. There's a problem with the money order supposedly used to pay for the gun and it not ending up in the right place or going through the right banks. And, Gil Jesus and John Armstrong have done a lot of good work about that, about the Mannlicher Carcano rifle and exactly, tracing it from the time it hit the shores, through the gunsmith, made its way to Klein's, and supposedly into Oswald's hands. And they talk about the FBI going to Klein's, the day after the assassination to try to figure out, if they could find this order slip. And they supposedly got there and spent, all night there until like 5 a.m. looking through all these microfiche files, couldn't find anything. So they asked the manager of Klein's if they could just take all the rest of it back to headquarters and see if they could find something. And miraculously, 3 days later, they do. So,
yeah, of course.
and then there's the problem, of course, with the rifle of his marksmanship and opportunity to actually practice.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah,
right.
Which is not to be confused with opportunity for the crime, because, it could be assumed that somehow he has a natural ability, I guess. But the thing is, all of these things, when put together, like that in and of itself is not enough to dismiss it. But the fact that he's got no time to practice, there's no way to sight in the weapon, which would have been required if it was actually a broken down weapon that had entered the schoolbook depository. The fact that you've got money orders that don't have the proper, the proper chain of stamps on them to go through the Federal Reserve System. The fact that you've got this package being delivered to a post office box to an alleged, alias of Oswald's, where that alias wasn't even actually allowed to collect mail at that post office box. All kinds of stuff where it just kind of says we don't have a clear paper trail on the weapon. And then please don't even get started on the handgun, because how is it that Roadway Express delivers a handgun to a post office box? That
to
is
a post office box, yeah.
Yeah, Charles, you want to say something about that?
Well, yeah, I was gonna. You actually stole my thunder there, Chuck, because that's what I was gonna bring up. Is that I believe it was actually called Railway Express, and a courier services that brings a pistol to a post office box. Well, the only thing that goes into post office boxes is United States mail, not stuff brought by couriers. Another problem with the rifle is he paid Oswald initially when he ordered. It was either the rifle or the pistol, one of the two. When he ordered it, he paid $10 down, and the rest was COD. Well, if it's delivered to a post office box, who pays for it?
Yeah.
I don't think the guy at the post office is going to say, "Oh, okay, here's $20." No, COD only works if you're delivering it directly to the person. And as we know in this case, that's not what happened. It went to post office box. So who pays for it? And is there any chain of command who paid for it? And the more and more you look at it, the more layers you unravel, the more the story falls apart.
Right. I was thinking, I did misspeak when I said Roadway. It was Railway Express, which, a modern-day equivalent would be like UPS, in a way, because they are a service which delivers packages like this. But UPS, check with the UPS office, they can't deliver stuff to a U.S. post office box because, as you just said, only United States Postal Service circulated matter ends up in post office boxes, Not to mention the fact that also there was, all all sorts of considerations in place. There was specific paperwork that needed to be filled out in order to ship firearms through the mail. And does anybody know where any of that stuff is?
And another thing, no, I don't think so. And another thing that's also strange is that Oswald sends this money order for the rifle to Klein Sporting Goods. He sends it, and I believe it is by the end of the next day, it's received and deposited into Klein's account. Going from Texas to Chicago in one day and processed it into the account. This is before computers. But in 24 hours, he sends this money order, and it's in the Klein's account. That just seems extremely, especially considering we're talking about 1963 here, not modern day, where everything now is like direct transfer. To have it done in one day, that's like light speed.
Yeah, and even if you did attempt to do it in one day in modern times, okay, try sending something through the post office overnight, okay, and getting it to a destination, and then also getting that into a bank.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to do now. You know, forget 1963. I mean, everything took longer. It's just a reality. Right? Rob, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just saying, yeah, that's just not possible. I mean, like you said, it's not possible now. It wasn't possible then. It's a fantasy. And just on an interesting side note, I thought I would add in here that as part of Jerry Patrick Hemming's application to the CIA, he put down as a past employer, Klein's Sporting Goods, Chicago, Illinois.
Ooh,
Nice.
isn't that interesting?
That's funny.
Right. They supposedly denied his request to, become a CIA agent, but the paperwork is there, and it was one of his past employers.
Yeah, you want to give a brief explanation who because we all know who Hemming is, but you want to give a brief explanation as to who Hemming is in your estimation?
Well, that's a daunting task, Chuck. Jerry Hemming is a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
That's good.
He was basically a mercenary, an anti-Castro Cuban raider, for hire. He was part of Interpen. I don't know, did he start Interpen or found it? I believe
I know he was.
but he's buddies with people like Felipe Vidal Santiago and Lawrence Howard and Lauren Hall, William Seymour, guys like that always get implicated in some form or fashion in the assassination.
Always part of the anti-Castro contingent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Didn't like Frank Sturgis. But he was always somehow in the wrong place at the right time, if you know what I mean, or the right place at the wrong time, depending on who he's telling the story to, because he even admitted himself that he lies to researchers. So what's the real truth? It's hard to say.
Yeah, very good. I was just going to say, I would not advise the listener, if you're unfamiliar with Hemming, to involve yourself in the Nexus, because the guy admits himself that he's a liar at various points, and misled a lot of people who were honestly interested in the various sort of overlapping scenarios regarding the anti-Castro contingent.
Yeah.
So, yeah. This guy is definitely one of those don't bother with the rabbit trail.
Well, yeah, I think that he exemplifies the danger of taking the word of anyone who even may have been a witness to some things, whether or not it goes as far as they might claim, that they can lie and they will lie, sometimes for money, sometimes for fame, sometimes just to stop you in your research so that you can't find out anything else.
I would say
or in Hemming's case, sometimes just for fun.
Yeah.
I would say once somebody goes out and admits, yeah, I'm a liar, I lie to people, I think you pretty much got to call into question pretty much anything that guy says.
Yep.
Once he's admitted that he lies. I don't know how you could go anywhere else. That's why I've never put any stock into what's that other guy? The guy that was trying to blame LBJ and Mac Wallace.
Roger Stone?
Yeah, no, the guy that was...
Sorry.
What was the guy's name? Rob, you know it, right? We talked about
Billy
him.
Celestes?
Yes.
Oh, Celestes, yeah.
Court and admitted under oath that he's a liar. So once someone says that, sorry, I'm going to take with what you say with a grain of salt.
No, absolutely. And I don't want to get too far off track because we've only covered the weapon as far as means. But, hey, let's, why not touch upon his skill level for a moment?
Sure.
You got something you want to add to that, Carmine?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was always my big contention, and I argued for months. I'm happy to see that the evidence finally came out to support, the side that I was contending, that he didn't have the time for practice. And if you look in firearms manuals, a good one is by L.P. Breezy, where they actually break down the process that you have to have firing practice with the Carcano's trigger mechanism, because the trigger mechanism is such that you're going to have to be adjusting things if you're not familiar with it, which is going to take too much time. And if he doesn't have the time to make the shots, then someone else has to be firing to have that many bullets.
Yeah, well, there's the problem. And then, of course, there is also, I don't know if anybody else wants to add into his skill level and all that.
Well, I was just going to say that firing a rifle and being a marksman is not just something that you can just stop for quite some time. Indeed. And then just pick up and skills stay the same. It's not like softball where you stop playing in October and then you come back in like May and you start hitting home runs. If you're going to be a marksman, that's something you've got to continuously practice. Otherwise, if you don't and you don't fire for a while, your skills will degrade. That's why you see these people who go into the Olympics in like the shooting, the biathlon one, where they're going around shooting targets. They're practicing year-round for years to maintain a level that's worthy of them going into competition. If they were to stop and then 3 years later pick it up, their skills would be completely degraded. They would be, not worthy of it. So it's something that you have to keep up. And again, in this case, we have no evidence that he ever did.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Charles said there. And if you look throughout his life, you can actually see his skills degrade, because in 56, he gets the highest marks because that's when he's doing the most training. He's the most interested in the Marines. He hasn't lost his faith in anything. Right. He's really into it. So that's when he makes, I believe it was just over sharpshooter. And then 3 years later, he becomes a marksman, which is a lower grade, which is a okay shot, not very good. And then now add a few more years where he goes to Russia. He never has access to rifles because those are illegal in Russia. He only has access to shotguns, which he rarely uses. Morena's friends tease him that he never brings his gun on the hunting club trips and never uses it. So he's not getting any regular practice. And not with a rifle at all. So when he comes back, he doesn't have a rifle in his hands that we can prove, that anyone can prove, until he gets the rifle supposedly from the mail. And he never practices with it. He dry fires a little bit. One time that has been notably proven that Morena claims she saw him doing on the porch. He was moving the bolt. But that's not firing practice. You can't operate the trigger mechanism quickly and efficiently. Now add in all the other problems that we've discussed. Add in the problem, with the scope. Then they say, well, he used the iron sights. Okay, well, if he used the iron sights, he's still got to be able to move it quick enough. He's still got to be able to fire. Any obstructions, it just doesn't stack up. It's very improbable, in my opinion.
Well, you know what else is not mentioned very often is the fact that where is his ammunition? He only had just enough shots to, just enough bullets, in the gun for that day left after all of this, alleged surreptitious practicing that he might have had to have done. I mean, where's his ammo? Does anybody know that?
Yeah, that's a good point, because they checked his garage, Ruth Payne's garage in her house and all her storage places there. They checked Beckley. They checked every gun shop around Dallas. Found no one that ever sold him any sort of ammo. Found no one that ever saw him in any gun shop buying ammo and found no evidence that he ever, no boxes, no receipts, no nothing. Are you telling me the guy went out and just randomly found 4 bullets? I mean, they came from somewhere. Where did they come from?
Okay, well, the devil's advocate argument here is that each of the weapons came with enough rounds through the mail order. But then, like I said, when it comes to practicing, he's got nothing to spare. He's got a full clip for the Carcano, and he's probably got enough to load the, to load the 38. I mean, that's it.
Well, to me, that just doesn't make any sense. So that means he doesn't practice once. So then you got to ask yourself, well, then did he use another bullet, for the Walker shooting? Which, of course, the bullet in the Walker shooting has never been matched up. So I just don't see it. Just doesn't make any sense. So he's going to just rely on out of the blue. Years after practicing in the Marines, he's just going to have just enough bullets and get 3 lucky shots. And that was his master plan, to just try and do this on a whim. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. It's laughable in my mind.
Right, and then on top of it, you mentioned the Walker shooting. Of course, that goes back to the first thing we discussed, which was motive, because they said that this was sort of the dry run for him wanting to hit a significant figure, and therefore, shows part of his motive, part of him building up to, and all of that, his state of mind, what it was about. But there's a problem there, too, or a few anyway. You guys want to discuss that?
Well,
yeah,
Go ahead, Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, too, that when it comes to Oswald's ability, to shoot the rifle accurately, I mean, you have to put yourself for a second up on the 6th floor as Oswald with that rifle in your hands, and you're sitting there and you're wondering if anybody's going to come in on you. What are you going to do? The president's motorcade is running late, and you're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting, and there's a physical reaction to stress. And unless Oswald was literally a cold-blooded killer with nerves of steel, he would have been shaking like a leaf trying to aim and fire that gun. And he would have been a sweaty mess. He would have been a wreck, really. And there's no evidence of that whatsoever.
Well, yeah, unless you want to believe Walter Cronkite, who, on the day that the Warren Commission report was released to the public, actually stated with a straight face on TV that this may have been a factor regarding someone shooting at a human being on any given day, but this was different because this was the President of the United States.
Yeah, but there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Oswald had ever shot or tried to murder anyone, well, unless you, of course, include General Walker into the mix, before, which if it was him shooting at Walker, he missed. So, there's no evidence that Oswald had killed before this.
Well, that was going to be my point, that if it was Oswald that shot at Walker, that's a ding against his accuracy, because he couldn't fire successfully and shoot a target that was sitting stationary like half the distance than what JFK's car was. So he had all the opportunity.
Right, and to accurately sort of point this out to people, you got to understand that Walker was a stationary target sitting in like a den or an office in his house. I forget exactly how they described the room. But, I mean, this guy was sitting in a chair, and by some, happenstance, according to the official story, just happened to bend down at the moment that somebody decided to fire a bullet through his window, and it ends up in the wall.
Yep.
Okay, I think that's a pretty accurate, fair picture of what they try to paint regarding the Walker shooting. So you're telling me that a guy who's standing on ground level with his target, who is not moving, missed.
Yet somehow made the shots required in Dealey Plaza with the means available.
Yeah, from an elevated position through, some tree branches, most likely, at an odd angle.
Well, here's what always bothered me is, okay, he's going to shoot the president of the United States and kill him, make a clean getaway. He's going to go back and get a handgun, and then he's going to go somewhere, and then he's going to kill a cop, And he's going to go to the movie theater, and then he's just going to give up and go quietly when they corner him. He's not going to go out in a blaze of glory. It just never made sense.
Well, in fairness, if you have to trust the testimony of the cops, which is difficult to do, but if you have to trust the testimony of the cops, I mean, he did try and pull his weapon, didn't do so good with the guy.
Well, that's right, because Superman put his hand in between the firing pin and the bullet. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Actually stuck the webbing between his thumb and his forefinger in between there and kept the hammer from falling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But that's that. I
wonder what the odds of that are.
Yeah, right. That's a hell of a move there. That's like a Matrix style move, 1963.
Yeah. Well, I
in the dark.
Well, yeah. As Charles, in the dark is another good note. As Charles was saying, about, and you guys were commenting about the Walker incident. Just looking at that, there's tons of problems with it. I mean, first of all, look at the target, General Walker. General Walker is not some unassociated person to this case. And people might say, well, Oswald did go to that one meeting with Michael Payne where he spoke. And apparently that and Walker's attitude was enough to make him want to kill him. Okay, well, if that's the case, then why did all the witnesses see two men the days before and the time after the shooting? Why is it that no one ever saw a lone person? We then have to trust that Oswald went there and he missed, and as Chuck stated earlier, if he can't make that shot, what are the odds he's going to make the shots, as I said, in Dealey Plaza? If he doesn't have the means to do that, how did he have the means to do it later with the same weapon, which Morena allegedly states was buried before and after the Walker shooting? As Charles said, they can't match the bullet. Walker himself has an agenda, and Oswald fits into that agenda perfectly. And according to some files, Walker may have been responsible for the entire thing being attributed to Oswald before the police even said anything, because Walker, according to one file, was talking to the German media days before Ruth Payne ever turned the book over with the note in it that ever spurred the Walker incident's creation.
Which is also suspicious. Go ahead, Charles.
I was just going to say another thing that's nothing you brought up a lot, but it kind of has always struck me as odd. Walker was known as a very much a right-wing leaning, general. He was very much to the right-wing, almost fascist type. When JFK was president, he was always considered by many to be sort of a left-leaning, president, left-leaning politician. Well, if you're shooting at both of them, how is it, if it's a political purposes, why would you shoot at both of them, which are kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum politically?
You know what the argument is there, and I got to give them this, is that at the time, contemporaneous with the events here, Kennedy is not necessarily as left-wing as people paint him, in the public's mind. In some parts of this country, he might as well have been a communist. That's for certain in certain sectors. But the reality is that the general public perception, and I'm assuming that Oswald, didn't run in the most extreme, and I want you guys to hit this one, wasn't exactly running in the most extreme circles right-wing wise. But the thing is that Kennedy wasn't necessarily painted as the most far-left person you could have. Now, Walker was a far-right guy and definitely had a discernibly different agenda. I mean, if you were striking at the heart of a particular ideal, and you struck at Walker, it really didn't make a whole lot of sense to go after Kennedy.
But Kennedy was anti-segregation. Walker was pro-segregation.
Right.
Like and they put him in a mental institution. So.
Well, yeah, that does tend to upset people when you throw them in a mental. Well, what if anyone deserved to go to a mental institution for an observation? It was Walker.
Yeah, this is all true. And still, we're talking about, and I don't want to get too far off track because we could do that all day. But back to the means. Okay, so the means to escape. Really not set up very well. He just sort of slipped out after he was already confronted. I mean, really, Baker would lament years later he wished he had shot him, privately, by the way. Never, I don't think, made that statement publicly, but he wished he had shot him after all the trouble he caused. Okay? And that's Marion Baker, the guy who actually confronts him, and some people argue about whether he had a soda in his hand or not. But interesting, if you believe he's got a soda, he shoots the President of the United States, is confronted by a cop a minute and a half later, and he's got a soda in his hand.
Well, yeah, depending on what version, because I know that, some people have talked about how there's multiple versions and multiple floors that supposedly might have occurred on.
Right.
Based on the DPD reports, which are a mess.
Well, and therein lies another problem, is that trying to draw this timeline for his means, and those that collected the evidence are the Dallas Police Department, and have fun with that one, ladies and gentlemen. If you really want to look at what happens to an investigation when it's not being handled with the utmost care, take a look at what the Dallas Police Department did. Okay? And as a matter of like regular practice, these guys would fill out reports like just one guy would wind up filling out a report who didn't even necessarily, participate in the events he's recounting. In sworn affidavit after affidavit, you find conflicts, you find problems. And in their testimony ever after, these guys would multiply claim to have been in places where they could not have been. I mean, draw the timelines for yourself. Go right ahead.
And you've spoken to them, so you know the problems that they faced. About
50 of them. I think
that's a pretty good number, dude.
It's not a bad number, but I mean, there were a lot more DPD guys there. I'm not saying that they were all like this, but seemed like a pretty common story where you didn't have these guys really keeping serious, meticulous track of everything that was going on. And even with that net that was out there, and of course this was a huge dragnet, locally to start with. And there was the involvement of the FBI really early on. There was, obviously the Secret Service wanted to know what happened. Everything else. In this huge dragnet, you still don't come up with all of the things that would have been required to give him those means, to put that gun in his hands, to give him the skill level, to give him all of this stuff. I mean, unless you guys have some other kind of ideas about it, I'd love to hear them.
Well, one of the things I've always found strange is that in Marion Baker's initial report, he wrote an initial report the day of. The initial report never mentions that him and Roy Trugley encountered anybody at any soda machine on any floor. Now, you would think that would be, at least something he would even mention just in passing. That, me and the building manager went up, we encountered one of the employees on the floor, and you'd want it to be rather detailed. It wasn't until later reports that Baker brought up that he mentions the encounter at the Coke machine. So I've always found that strange, whether it's meaningless, whether he forgot, but I found it a little odd anyways.
Yeah, because the handwritten report doesn't match the typewritten report, which is really funny because according to some accounts, and again, I've got conflicts on these accounts, but according to some accounts, he's literally typing up that report in the same room where Oswald is already in custody, okay, and doesn't make a correlation while he's typing up that report that this is who we're talking about, really, that this is the guy that he stopped on that floor.
Yeah, I have a theory why, Chuck, about that.
Oh,
if you want to hear it.
Sure, I'd love to hear it.
I think it was about 97 or 98. Well, there was a guy named Otis Wilson who worked on the fourth floor in one of the book offices, who was out front when the motorcade passed and the shots happened and all that. And in the first Marion Baker account, he, like he said, he didn't mention the lunchroom, the second floor lunchroom encounter, but he did mention encountering a fellow wearing a brown jacket that truly said, no, he's okay, he works here, on like the third or fourth floor, I believe, is what he said. Now, and I think it was 97 or 98, Otis Wilson came forward for the first time and recounted what he did after shots were fired. He said almost immediately he turned and went back in the school book depository and was going back up to his office and called his wife to let her know what had just happened. Okay? Now, he didn't see Oswald. And then we, of course, have the account of Victoria Adams and Sandra Stiles coming down from the fourth floor. So what I'm thinking is Otis Wilson made it up. before Sandra and Vicky went down. Because they waited like a minute and a half or 2 minutes before they went down the stairs. But if Otis is coming up almost instantly, that might have been who Marion Baker saw, the tail end of, as him and Truly are going up those stairs.
Mm. No, that makes some sense. And, and of course, convenient, by the way, because the whole jacket thing was, the jacket itself was later recovered near the Tippett scene that, that they claim he had, which is kind of funny because according to the story that I understood, he had to have collected it from the rooming house after he fled, which, hey, I guess we're going to have to cover this in Opportunity because, remember, this is a guy who allegedly shoots the president, is confronted by a cop, slips out of the book depository building, which is a place he works in, catches a cab, after he's caught a bus, mind you. So bus, first on foot, then to a bus, takes a transfer, leaves the bus, gets into a taxi, takes a taxi past his rooming house, then walks to his rooming house. This is not an expedient escape plan.
Yeah,
no, we're not talking a couple houses up.
Yeah,
we're talking seven blocks up past his house, not like a couple houses. 7 blocks past his rooming house that he walks back.
Right.
So there's just not enough time in the official Warren Commission timeline for him to do all the stuff they said he did. It's just
Indeed.
not possible.
Yeah, despite your friends at the Sixth Floor Museum now trying to show you a different path that he could have taken and everything else in later years, it still doesn't work. But anyway.
Unless the path is through a magical teleport chamber.
Well,
it's going to be hard to put him in some of the places as fast as they say he got there.
Well, we do have, the precursor to email, I guess, because you can get something from one place to another in 24 hours and then into another place, which is a bank, in 24 hours. I mean, I can't see why there wouldn't be the precursor to the teleportation machine, which we still don't have to this day, but hey.
Where are the files?
Carmine just wants the files. That's it.
I just picture Oswald speed walking everywhere.
Exactly. He just never, ever walks or
twitching
stops.
his little hips.
Going like the Roadrunner.
Yeah.
Nice.
Beep, Richie.
Can I throw in one last thing on the Walker incident?
Oh, please do.
The letter. The letter is basically how they create the entire incident, and they extrapolate and then enter the investigation looking for other things to connect to it. Now, the problem with the letter is Oswald, who supposedly wrote it, and Morena, who supposedly read it, their fingerprints aren't on it. But there are unidentified fingerprints on it.
Oh, boy. Here we go with the unidentified fingerprints again.
Exactly. So how does that happen? The oil from their fingers would have formed prints, and we know that for sure, and they would have been there because the unidentified ones are. Now, I'm not saying they're unidentified like they couldn't figure out if it was them. It wasn't them. It was someone else. So how? Are
you sure one of them wasn't Mac Wallace's?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Sorry.
Nice, exactly.
Am I correct in saying also on that letter that it A, never specifically mentions Walker, and B, does not have any sort of date on it?
Nope, no date, no mention, no specific instructions, really.
We really don't know when and where and what that letter was, when it was constructed, or what it was all about. That letter could have been 3 years old for all we know.
Yeah, he could have wrote it at any time for any of the crazy things that, and I don't mean crazy to say he was crazy, but any of the off-color things that he might have done, he could have written that letter for.
And I don't even know if he wrote it because it was in perfect Cyrillic.
Yeah.
Russian, which I doubt that he was capable of even writing that.
And I think Chuck has discussed that before. I've talked to you about that, and I heard Walt Brown talking about that the other day, too. That he actually, some notes Morena got were parts were in English for him because he had trouble with Russian.
Right. Even Ernst Titovitz, who I had on the show, discussed, writing things both in Russian and English when he wrote a letter to the two of them after they had departed from the Soviet Union. So, yeah. And besides that, his writing skills in English
were bad.
I mean, again, if you go back to the other myths, somebody says that they were helping him with his grammar. And that's why they seemed to improve when he was in New Orleans. But
they're wrong.
I really tried to promise myself I would not. I haven't mentioned the name yet. But,
exactly, like Voldemort.
Yeah. She who shall not be named.
Hey guys, I gotta get off here and head out of soccer practice here.
It was great talking to you, man.
Listen, I appreciate that you dropped in with us even to do this, halfway through, man. Really do appreciate it. And everybody, do check out the Gunman podcast. Just search it out. What episode are you on now?
64. And you can find them all at tlgpodcast.com.
Yep.
There you go.
Thanks, show. Highly recommended.
Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate you having me on, buddy.
Listen, thank you, Rob, and we will speak again soon. I'll tell you.
Take care,
I'll be
man.
listening. All right, see y'all.
So, yeah, Rob Clark, definitely. I also recommend his podcast and tell you that, I even go back and listen to some of the old ones now because, like I said before, I sort of was turned off by the name at first. I thought it was like, maybe something that might be sponsored by somebody with the initials DVP or something like that. And, another one who shall not be named on this show. Anyway, that's an inside joke.
Don't worry, he won't debate, so it's not like you can't name him.
Yeah, that's true. But neither will she. Anyway, because I put that open invitation out, and it's not coming. And I only have 5 questions for her. But okay, let me stop. Okay.
Exactly. Only official myths tonight. Only official myths.
We'll try.
Yes.
We'll try to stay on the official myths. Okay. So we have definitely, in my estimation, disposed of, and then even gone back for a remedial course once again on motive.
Yeah.
Means. We have destroyed means, in my estimation.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, with means, I think part of the means would have been, like we said, the Walker incident. There's just so many holes in it that between the lack of witness corroboration, the lack of the bullet being corroborated, the chain of evidence with the bullet, that they can't even give a date for the note, so we don't even know that it's directly connected. You don't have any fingerprints on the note, so you don't even know if Oswald wrote it. It's written beyond his skill level, right, which would infer that someone else wrote it and planted it there for Ruth Payne to find or bring somewhere.
And then you have, of course, the magic bullet itself.
Yeah.
Which I'm just going to throw it out there, guys, and say this. You have a bullet which... chain of custody is no good. The nature of the evidence is no good.
Mm-hmm.
What is good about the magic bullet, and what is the deal? What do you guys think? I mean, Charles, I'll let you start, because I know we all love to go into this, and I'll just lead my comments in that general direction and let you have at it, sir.
It's so difficult to know where to start with the magic bullet, because there's so many issues with it. It's not even funny. Like you said, chain of command, trajectory, the condition of the physical bullet itself, whether it even matched the rifle itself. All of it just doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, the problem is, one of the biggest problems is with me, is that you look at the supposed headshot, and it hits Kennedy in the head and basically explodes and breaks into, dozens of pieces going all over the car. But then you've got the magic bullet, which is traveling downward and at I think the degree is something like 17 degrees or something like that. The problem is, if it goes straight through and it's traveling downwards, it's not traveling upwards, it should just keep going downwards and should go down and almost embed itself in like the lower seat or the lower car. For whatever reason, it seems to come out of Kennedy in a straight line. Now, here's the one thing that's always bugged me. They typically will go off and say that when the bullet enters John Connolly, it was yawing or tumbling or whatever. Here's my problem with that, is that they also contend that the bullet goes straight through Kennedy, and that the bullet, as described by the Parkland doctors, was, I think, about 5 millimeters. So it's just a tiny little hole, which means it went straight through. It wasn't tumbling, it wasn't yawing, it wasn't doing anything. And I think when it hits Connolly, less than a second later, probably a fraction of a second later, it enters him in such a way where it's straight up and down, almost like the shadow of a bullet. So in that time, it turned that much. It didn't have time to make that kind of turn, that kind of flip where it's going straight, and all of a sudden it turns upwards. So it's straight up and down as opposed to a small hole. And the jacket in Connolly's, or the hole in Connolly's jacket and his shirt, they line up with it being the straight, almost like a straight up and down bullet. So how did it do that in such a time when the hole in JFK's throat is so small and round, like it was a straight through bullet? It just doesn't seem to make sense, and it just doesn't seem to have the time to adjust to be like that. That's problem number one.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I'll leave the more specific ballistic matters to you guys, because as I don't know if you've ever run into Ed Cage, what a gem he is, but he's always trying to discuss specific ballistics matters with, I'm sure, a book he has, or he studied a certain type of ballistics and he's really good at it. And I'm not a ballistics expert, so I leave that to ballistics experts. But what I have been able to pull from the files regarding the single bullet, I'll try to stick to, and that's, like the chain of custody was totaled. Out of the 6 people that supposedly handled the bullet, only one could say it was the same bullet that went into evidence.
Right.
So, right there. I mean, if, as Chuck said earlier, there was no trial. So, a lot of people who support the commission might want to not be quite so sure of themselves, because under the law, the presumption of innocence stands. If we were to go, you can't get a conviction under normal circumstances on Oswald. That's why the commission had to lower the standards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, O.P. Wright, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, O.P. Wright, who was the director of security at Parkland Hospital, said he received the bullet. He described it as a pointed nose hunting round when he got it. And of course, as you know, the Carcano is a rounded nose, and it's not a hunting round.
Yeah.
So
it's jacketed.
And that's just one of the conflicting. There are several of them. There's
right.
even discrepancy about which stretcher it was found on, whether it was even found on the proper stretcher.
Yeah, no, there's two. In the executive sessions, McCloy and Rankin talk about how they have 2 stories.
Yeah.
They have it on Kennedy's stretcher, and they have it on Connolly's stretcher, but then I think, Chuck, we were talking about it, and you were discussing how it might have been on another person's stretcher as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, the person that actually picks it up, okay, that guy describes a stretcher that more accurately could be associated with Ronald Fuller, who was a child who was injured and happened to be in the emergency room that day, which has absolutely nothing to do with this case. It wasn't like they used the Fuller stretcher for Connolly or something like that. No, that's an impossibility. Again, the stories don't match up. The chain of custody's no good. The bullet's no good. Now, to say something about the ballistics and the tumbling and the yawing, there's 2 kind of schools of thought here which I think seem relatively accurate. First of all, a bullet can do that tumbling to get that oblong injury on Connolly. What's bizarre about this is the trajectory in order to line it up, how you're going to put that into Kennedy and then out of if it was 2 separate shots, it makes more sense. If there's another wound on Kennedy a little further down the road, it makes more sense. Can it be theoretically lined up? Possibly, but then you don't have the bullet like it is. I mean, as you stated before, the headshot, you wind up with fragmentary evidence which remains in the car. They wind up taking it out of the carpet later. I think there's 2 large sections of bullet fragment, And then there's a smaller third one which reappears and disappears in the official evidence, by the way. Gotta love that. But no, I'm not kidding you. If you look at the FBI photographs of the bullet fragments, sometimes you have this little additional piece, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
It's
that.
which is very strange. But either way, let's just go with the idea that you can't trace the rounds back to him. Okay, because it's even if you can assume that the weapon is the weapon, which that's also a problem, but even if you assume that the weapon is the weapon, it's difficult to put it in his hands. You can't get it into the book depository because Doherty doesn't see it come in, and that was his job. So unless he was asleep at the switch, Oswald was able to sight in a weapon, without firing it, which, from my understanding, if you have to reassemble the Carcano in any way, shape, or form, you're going to have to sight it back in because the thing is not going to be accurate to be fired through the iron sights like they used to love to tell us about, despite the fact that the scope would also be a hindrance. I mean,
Well, and, we also might want to add in the fact that there were 4 other people in the building that never get mentioned. There were, Doherty being one of them. That might have been on the 5th or 6th floor, depending on which version of his testimony you look at. And then he becomes somebody with an emotional problem that gets turned over to his parents and allowed to leave, even though he was trained in the Army.
This is true, and there's also the strange case of Charles Gibbons, who, returns up there. They pressure him. I mean, read his testimony sometime and imagine what goes on.
Yeah, or Frazier, when they tried to get Frazier to sign the affidavit saying that he was related to Oswald.
Right. All sorts of pressuring of witnesses, which is kind of weird if you're doing an investigation,
Well, and we know how much of an investigation they really wanted. Another document that we can discuss in length one night, but I have a document from the Weisberg archives, and it's a private conversation with Hoover telling them that they don't want a commission. Johnson and Hoover just wanted the FBI, investigation with all 3 days, and in a week to have everything done.
I've actually got a recording of that conversation between Johnson and Hoover, where they're actually discussing that, and you can clearly hear Johnson on the tape saying, I just saying to Hoover, I just want you guys get away with you guys just filing your report that he didn't want a commission. I've actually got that phone conversation on a CD I have.
Great.
Just one other thing that I wanted to bring up about the 6th floor and so on, and Oswald bringing the rifle in, is you also got the story of Bonnie Ray Williams, who was sitting up on the 6th floor eating his lunch from about, I guess it was just before 12 o'clock, and he said that he came back down, sometime around 12:15 or 12:20. Well, this would have had to have been at the time where Oswald was constructing the quote-unquote sniper's nest. But Bonnie Ray Williams didn't hear anything. He was on the 6th floor, and yet you got someone supposedly moving boxes into this big formation there, and you don't hear anything? And you're sitting on the same floor?
One of the key points of accuracy, actually, in the movie JFK is Bonnie Ray Williams is on the 6th floor eating his lunch, and he sees nobody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is Oswald lying in wait in the sniper's nest the entire time?
Well, if that's the case, when did he build it? Because you got to build that thing at some point.
Which they were moving boxes, yeah.
Not only that, he's got to put together the rifle apparently using a dime.
Oh, well, that's the other problem is that,
It didn't come in assembled.
Ian Grigg's demonstration on this is most hilarious because it just illustrates the point. He has no tools on him in order to put this thing together. If you're going to assemble it with a dime, okay, fine, but you ought to see how much effort that actually takes. Even if it's partially disassembled, you got a problem, and it's just on and on and on and on, and what's wrong?
Then there's the brown wrapping paper that he supposedly wrapped the rifle in to bring it to work, and
that there is no photo of. There's just an outline of it.
There's no photo on the 6th floor. There's no one, no one ever seeing him taking the wrapping paper, basically of 2 pieces, 6 feet long. And when did he take it back to Ruth Payne's with him? And how did he get it back there with nobody seeing him carry it?
And I think that leads us almost perfectly, whenever you're ready, Chuck, for opportunity.
Well, and that's exactly it. Motive and means. Okay. So what is left? Well, let's go with opportunity. And even though if we were in a court of law and we had completely,
Majority of what's been going on.
deconstructed this, right? If that had happened, we would already not have a case. But let's continue forward anyway. Opportunity. Oh, Carmine, do you want to open that one?
Sure. So, and can you hear me okay? Because you kind of blinked out there for a second, so I'm sorry if I talked over you at all.
No, it's okay. I've got you fine. I think Charles is still with us.
Okay. Yeah. As
I'm still here. Yep.
Yeah, as I and Charles prior discussed, Rob, Zach, Trish, everybody pretty much, the timeline does not work. And where it really falls apart, in my opinion, and I was happy to be able to find these things and share them with my fellow researchers and friends, is that Oswald, at maximum, based on the timeline, the commission, and the evidence they gave us on him, has 72 hours or less, and I would contend he has less than 48 hours to get everything done. Now, that is because it was not released to the newspapers until November 19th in the morning edition. 5 a.m. is what I've been told was when that came out, that Kennedy was going to pass the school book depository. The full route was not available until then. So, let's say that Oswald was standing on the corner of the street at 5:01 and give him all the time we possibly can. He grabs it as it flies out of someone's hand, and he sees that Kennedy's going to be there. So now the clock starts. First thing you have to do is you have to remove 3 nights of sleep. That can vary, let's say 6 to 8 hours. He was known to go to bed early, and he did on the night before the assassination.
That's true.
So let us say that, we'll be nice. We'll say 6 times 3 is 12. Now we're down to 60 hours. Now 3 days of work. Now there you can't cut corners. It's about 8 hours a day. So 8, 8, 8, 24. Now we are below 40 hours.
Well, 6 times 3, if you give him 3 nights
18,
of sleep, is 18. So
60, 50, so 42 hours left. Mm-hmm. And that's now add in eating, any associating he did, all of the activities that the commission says he did. Mm-hmm. And in all of this, there's no practice. He chooses to spend these most critical points at the Payne's house eating dinner and going to bed early at 9 o'clock. Now, as Charles just said, when does he create the bag? When does he take apart the rifle? How does no one see him? Does he do it early in the morning? Well, there's other people up and around too. He doesn't live there alone in the Payne home. So there's all these opportunities once again that he's going to be discovered. So he makes not a single mistake from there all the way to the depository until he shoots. Then he starts making mistakes again. And if you look at his record, Oswald makes mistakes. Mm-hmm. He's not known to do a lot of perfectly exemplary plots.
No, it seems that every time he does something, it does seem to backfire on him in one way or another, sometimes literally.
Indeed.
Again, a guy who shot himself in the leg. Okay?
Yeah, this is the man who they are saying can, by himself, in 48 hours or less, pull everything off without a mistake. And that, to me, is the most improbable thing of all. The commission painted themselves into an evidentiary corner.
Right. So they surrender the point of actually, creating a plausible motive, and they have absolutely no opportunity in your estimation. Charles, what do you think about Oswald's opportunity as per the official story?
Well, I was just going to kind of further what Carmine was saying, so that from the time he gets to the book depository in the morning, which I think was around 8 a.m. or just after 8 a.m., mm-hmm. He's got to take this rifle. He's got to find a place where he's going to be storing this rifle for approximately 3.5 hours. And he's got to be able to put it somewhere where nobody else is going to find it, but yet it's going to be readily available to him around 11:30 noon, where he's going to have to go upstairs and, construct the sniper's nest. Now, everybody that was on the 6th floor, I think, went down for lunch at some sometime at around 10 or 5 to 12. So once they go down for lunch, that gives Oswald 35 minutes to go up, construct a sniper's nest, which I think he used something like 18 boxes.
Right, to something like 18 boxes. And the fact that he's got to then assemble the rifle in the boxes and all that. We seem to have lost Charles, by the way, but I'll just continue on with his point. All of this going on, and yet he is seen by no one with the rifle. He's seen by no one doing this action of creating the sniper's nest. I used to love Bill Hicks' commentary on this.
Exactly, how great that the Sixth Floor Museum
That
was.
the
Because
Sixth Floor Museum is so wonderful because it's entirely historically accurate. If you look in the window at the sixth floor, Oswald isn't in it.
Exactly.
It's beautiful. And yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. To go off of what Charles was stating. Yeah, I mean, then he somehow has to find the holes in the fractional, moments when people are moving around him at all times to go downstairs or come back up and get other people to go back downstairs and watch the motorcade. And it's late. So even if he had planned it down to the minute, the plans were foiled because they were 10 minutes late.
Exactly. Oh, I know. That's a huge part of the equation here is that the motorcade comes late, so even whatever he had planned out, allegedly, still doesn't come together properly because the motorcade is late. Plus, you have all of these sort of variables happening here. What if somebody doesn't want to go down for lunch? What if somebody didn't have lunch that day?
Yeah.
What if two guys end up talking for a while? He's got all sorts of variables to have to deal with there that he just gets so lucky.
Exactly. How much luck and how many coincidences are necessary to make this come off? And unfortunately, it seems like far too many.
Exactly. And it's okay, Charles. We know.
Yeah,
we continued on with your point, sir.
Skype's not being my friend.
Not today. But it's okay. We filled in the
Skype
the
has
gap
not been
there.
my friend the last couple of days. Right.
You've caught some of the same disease that I get every now and then. So it's okay. It'll pass, sir. But so opportunity here is really pretty well destroyed in my estimation again.
Yeah.
Okay. And let me say this. There is absolutely no part of the official evidence that doesn't have problems, contradictions, implausible scenarios. I mean, it's endless, the amounts of difficulty with trying to put together a coherent case against the lone assassin, in my estimation.
Here's another part sorry.
No, go ahead, Charles.
I was going to say, another part I find implausible. So let's say Oswald does do the shooting. He shoots Kennedy. So at that point, he doesn't know whether anybody looked up and saw him, shooting. Anyone down in the crowd could have looked up, saw him in the window firing a rifle or anything like that. But yet he goes downstairs and walks out the front door, not knowing if anybody has viewed him. For all he knows, he goes down, walks out the front door. 4 or 5 people are saying, hey, there's the guy that was up there. There's the guy we saw. But he waltzes leisurely out the front door.
Right, and again, what do you have when you look to the people that might have saw him, could have seen him, et cetera, et cetera? You got one newsman that claims he saw a barrel sticking out of the window. You have Amos Ewens, who gives a completely different account of what he saw. I think he was confused about who was on the 5th floor and who was on the 6th floor, but he was a kid, okay? You have then Howard Brennan, the star witness.
Mr. Brennan.
For the Warren Commission.
The man who changed his story 3 times.
Oh, did he?
And never actually positively identified Oswald for almost a month, even though he was shown him in a lineup that night.
Yeah. And they say that he positively identified him. I'm sorry, when you have multiple versions of testimony, it's questionable. I'm not saying we can rule out what he said, but if we're going, there has to be an equal amount of consistency in how we treat all the witnesses. So if we're going to rule out, pro-conspiracy witnesses who change their testimony, then he gets ruled out too.
Yes.
Plus, he's got a problem with his eyesight.
Yeah.
That's a reality.
Well, some said that didn't happen until afterwards, but I know that's a topic of debate.
Sure, okay. So we'll put that aside, fine. But here's the fun part for me, which is a description goes out over the Dallas police radio of an individual that supposedly did the shooting. I have never found, there is the assumption that Brennan is the source for a description which includes height, approximate weight, race, a lot of detail to be seen standing on the ground looking 6 floors up when, ostensibly you're being distracted by the commotion in front of you and the fact that you were there to watch the motorcade with the president in it to begin with. A whole lot of detail that this guy snapshotted for everybody, if he is in fact the source for that description.
I've actually gone down and stood where Howard Brennan was standing, and I looked at the 6th floor when I was in Dallas. Now, you could probably get some general features of the guy. I don't see how a guy standing there is going to get that detailed of a description of a guy standing that far down. It just, to me, it seems ludicrous.
Well, he was what? Was he under 200 feet? I know 200 feet is when things get really blurry. I've looked at just vision charts because I was trying to figure out, exactly how consistent some of the witness testimony could have been depending on the distance. And Brennan's right on the cusp. I think he was like 120, maybe 140 feet. So you can make out colors, you can make out, more vague descriptive things, but to really get features and stuff, it's difficult over 100 feet. It's almost impossible at 200 feet unless you have really good vision.
Yeah, through windows in a commercial/industrial area.
There you go, too. If the window's only cracked so that you can only see the arms and the gun, then that's really... And the windows there, even now in the museum format, are still not, crystal.
Yeah,
right. And at the time where shots are going off and there's a lot of commotion all around you.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I mean, where is it that this guy got to see? And meanwhile, he's really the only one that tags Oswald with the shooting. That's their star witness. That's what this whole thing really hinges upon. Without him, without even that singular witness, they've got nobody.
And of course, there are more witnesses that saw other descriptions shooting.
This is the other problem, is that he's actually outnumbered by individuals who have differing accounts. I mean, look, I can dismiss Amos Ewins because he understood there was a commotion in that general area. He looked up, and prominently sitting on a windowsill were 2 guys, And, hey, I can't account for what somebody's level of observation is necessarily, but it seems to me as though he sort of... created a composite in his mind of what was going on and assumed that the individuals that caught his sight first were involved. So this is why you actually have a description of what he said was a colored man shooting. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, and don't give me the crap about how I said colored just now. This is a black kid using the terms of the time in 1963. He was describing someone who was not white as colored.
Exactly. So, and this, when we're talking about historical research, if people can't make that distinction, they might want to tune into something else.
Right. So, but that note aside, what do we have left here? I mean, is there any other sort of way that, opportunity can arise? Now, when it comes to the Tippit shooting, opportunity, again, is questionable. However, I will say this, the scenario is a lot more likely.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think, as I'm sure from our repeated discussions on and off the air, that I do not support the official story. I think the Tippit shooting at least is possible, as where the Kennedy shooting is highly improbable because of all the factors that weigh against it with motive, means, and opportunity. With motive, means, and opportunity with Tippit, he had the gun, so he had the means. I mean, it wasn't a great gun. it was modified improperly or it was modified in an amateurish way. So
Still difficult to put in his hands. And just for the clarification of the listener, you're talking about a gun which was exported from the U.S. and actually the barrel remachined so that it could handle, I think, British ammunition, and then reintroduced, re-imported back into the U.S. and supposedly, usable with, again, the U.S. standard on the ammo. All right. And, I mean, that's the basics of this, the lineage of this weapon. And, of course, again, difficult to put it in his hands, but let's just assume we can put it in his hands.
yeah,
And
at least they have a motive, escape.
Right. Well,
It's something.
but here's always been my problem with that handgun. Also, not only the chain of events that puts it in his hand. Forget that for just a minute. But for somebody that's thinking about shooting the president with a rifle from a distance, wouldn't it be kind of helpful to have a handgun with you so that in case somebody did attempt to capture you, you could do what they alleged him to have done in the case of J.D. Tippit?
Yeah. Good to have an extra weapon, I would imagine.
You're not going to shoot. You're not going to shoot yourself out with a rifle and one bullet.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Exactly. The one round that was still left in the weapon. This is not a plausible way by which someone is going to achieve escape if they are now caught up in in the situation that could have very easily ensued. Because look, there's no guarantee that there couldn't have been a whole lot more witnesses, not only outside of the depository looking up, but I mean, how does he even know that no worker is going to come back up for whatever reason? Despite Gibbons going back up for his cigarettes, he says, and stuff like that at certain points. Well.
Yeah.
How does he know that that's not going to happen? I would, if I was doing this and somehow decided in, for less than 48 hours to do so and had been, I guess, psychic and, inclined with psychic skills to know to make the bag way in advance so that, I would be ready and all that, I might have had the foresight to carry the sidearm with me, in case of those eventualities. But again,
but that slipped his mind.
In the midst of all this meticulous planning, that one sort of eluded him. And I know I'm making a joke here. But right, he's flawless for the rest of it. I mean, I don't know what else you want to say about the Tippit killing. But even though it is also suspect and a mess, and you have improper witnesses and improper ballistics,
and the timeline has problems.
And the timeline, I mean, where do you want to stress on that one, Charles?
Again, like with the magic bullet, there's a lot of issues there. One of the biggest problems I've always had was that the slugs of the gun that were apparently dumped out. I don't know why you stopped to dump the slugs out, but they don't match the bullets. Because I believe the bullets taken out of Tippit were, I think it was 3 Remingtons and 1 Winchester. And the shells were 2 Remingtons and 2 Winchesters. So it's strange how the bullets and the shells in this case don't match, but they kind of skirt by that issue and don't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah, he's ejecting the rounds as he's walking away and dropping them on the ground. Again, not exactly very meticulous in his flight.
No. And then the timing of the paramedics coming to pick Tippit up. Who called the paramedics?
Yeah, that's
because
something.
We know, of course, the cab driver, Scoggins. He runs up and uses Tippit squad car radio to radio into the police. But we even really know who actually called the paramedics.
Yeah, no, that's an issue that should be brought up more often. That how quickly it took. On Rob's request, I checked out with a paramedic friend of mine, and it usually takes at least a few minutes to respond. So unless these people are down the street waiting, it's going to take more time. Then they're going to not just grab a body and throw it in. They're going to check to see if he's alive. If he's dead, they might wait for the police before they just take the body and mess up the crime scene.
Right, and Kim was an EMT also.
Oh, okay.
And guess what? Yeah, they would have had to waited for other police to show up in order to secure evidence and things like that, especially, given that, I mean, if they were trying to, perform life-saving, actions, they might have taken certain actions, but from my understanding, according to the autopsy, Tippett was pretty much dead instantly.
Yeah.
So when they got there, they knew they had a cold body. That was it. So there was no reason.
There's no reason to rush him on.
Right. So, I mean, and that standard has been in place for a long time. I mean, people could say that, well, historically speaking, maybe they didn't have the same standards. And you know what? I'll give them a point there, because considering the idiot they had pumping on Oswald's, gut shot, trying to do CPR on him at City Hall on Sunday, maybe it does speak in some way to the quality of the medical professionals and the individuals involved in first aid in the Dallas area.
I do want to speak a little bit in defense, and I know some people will not be happy with this, but I would like to speak a little bit in defense of the officials of Dallas. They were under a hell of a gun. I mean, everything was being loaded onto them. The FBI was going to blame them for everything, no matter what they did.
No,
and the media was on them. So you're right. There's massive incompetence. I would never disagree with that. That's always been my contention. There's massive incompetence, but I place that incompetence on the leaders rather than the entire force. I guarantee a majority of them did a decent job. Unfortunately, we got the Keystone Cops.
Well, yeah, a lot of them did try, and that was one of the things that I got to say in fairness, after speaking to a lot of these guys, guys like Maddox and guys even like, and I know nobody likes it when I say this, but even like a guy like Lavelle, these guys were trying to do their job. They really were. They were misled by their, captains and et cetera, et cetera. This is true. And, everything just seemed to go against them. A lot of them, ever after felt like, it was just sort of a black cloud came in and it didn't leave until after, after Ruby was already off the scene there. But, and we didn't even get into that because, of course, the commission then contends after all this, even though they have no motive, no means, no opportunity for Oswald to have pulled off, well, not either homicide. In the case of Tippett, there are possibilities. But in the case of Kennedy, it's a completely untenable case in my estimation. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, after that, and they have the world-famous, most highly, recognizable, known individual on the planet at that point to have ever been arrested on live television. They let this guy get shot in their custody. And that is supposed to also be the act of a lone nut.
A random nightclub owner who happened to just walk down a ramp with nobody seeing him, just walks into position, then walks in front of them and shoots them while surrounded by dozens of armed police officers.
Oh, yeah.
Which we know, we talked about this briefly, I think, on one of the older episodes, is not the case, because P.T. Dean was influenced by one of the commission staff to not say that he saw Ruby when he originally said he saw Ruby pass him.
And Dean was shady. Dean was just shady anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, let's.
Dean could have created the story. That's possible, but to me, just with the connections, like Charles was saying, they always presented Ruby as just some nightclub owner. Well, no, that's not who he is. They were wrong. They didn't have all the files because Hoover and McCone both signed those affidavits saying that they didn't know anything, which wasn't true. We know that there were hundreds of thousands of files that were pertinent, and some of them were Ruby. That Ruby was an FBI informant in '59. He was an unsuccessful one. He didn't give them any information according to the files, but he was he was offered as a potential informant, and they tried to develop him. Mm-hmm. But Hoover lied about all that. He said there were no connections.
Yeah.
And if you mean to tell me that because of Ruby's interactions in Cuba and the fact that he was just merely present and that he had connections to organized crime figures, that a guy like Dulles was not aware of any of that?
Exactly, especially when they're working with them on the Castro plots during the same period.
Right.
So what are we talking about here? More denial, more cover-up, and again, motive, means, and opportunity are really strange. This time, you can put the means in the shooter's hands.
Yeah.
He had it, that's for sure.
Yep, and he knew how to use it. He actually,
Yep.
I guarantee you, Jack had fired a firearm before.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet good money that Jack Ruby had actually fired a weapon in his life.
Yeah, that was not his. That was not his first time shooting a
Right.
firearm.
Right.
Yeah.
And his interaction with the police is well documented and everything else. So, gee, you have means, you have opportunity here in the Ruby case. The motive, though,
It's very questionable.
He had a motive, all right, but I don't think it's the motive we've been told by them.
Exactly. It doesn't appear, based on my opinion, too. A substantial amount of the evidence does not support that motive.
Yeah.
You know, first they tried to divorce him from the mob, which isn't the case. Then they tried to divorce him from all the hundreds of connections he had to the Dallas police. You know, and as you've said before, that's a lowball statement. Maybe that was only the people who he was really close with. But, you know, I mean, we have police officers saying it isn't uncommon to get a call from Jack Ruby.
you know, speaking of lowball statements, just really quickly, Charles earlier said, you know, in the custody, in the presence of dozens of Dallas police officers. Do you know what number I came to a long time ago on the number of officers present? 70.
Wow.
70. So that's my count. Let's just say I'm wrong by a little bit. That means that, let's just give me a margin of error of 10. We're talking 5 dozen.
Yeah.
Okay.
So somebody in there, besides Dean, if Dean did see him, likely knew him. Somebody.
Yeah, you can't tell me that out of 60 people, nobody went, oh, that's Jack.
And funny, in a situation like that, you would think, if that were to really happen, you would think in a situation like that, people in the police department would be losing their jobs left and right. I never heard of one person that did.
No one was punished. Same with the
No
Secret
one
Service.
was punished, yet you've had a prisoner surrounded by armed police murdered right in front of you, and nobody loses their job. And there's no internal investigation, no nothing.
Right, and I will say, okay, and I'm being corrected via Skype message. All right, fine. I'll say that Oswald was probably the highest profile prisoner in American history, okay, at that point in time. That's what I would say. Maybe he wasn't the highest. I did say world history. That's probably not true. You're right. You're right, but...
It's not Ho Chi Minh, you know, there's a couple.
No, it's not Mussolini who they wound up hanging or anything else.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But in American history, you know, what else do we have as far as a prisoner? John Wilkes Booth is not a prisoner because he wasn't taken into custody.
Exactly.
Found him, they shot him.
Yeah.
Exactly. They just shot him.
Right. So he was just killed, you know, straight up. Never taken into custody. So I would say that you know, he was definitely the most infamous prisoner in American history, in U.S. history. Okay, that's fine by me. Do you guys? I had a couple of people trying to call in. Do you guys want to take a couple of calls, or do you got closing thoughts here? Because I know we're getting down to like the last 15 minutes. Believe it or not.
No, we can take a few calls. I'm good with that.
Yeah.
All right, if you want to join in on the conversation, it's 718-717-8296. If you're on the Skype list, you can join in also. I will add you right in. You can ask any questions you want about what we've been discussing. That's all fine and dandy, but...
No block numbers.
No block numbers, yes. I always do forget to say that. Thank you, Carmine. Block numbers, I cannot accept your call while I'm on the air. So, they'll take a few minutes...
Feel free to try to seek us out and scream at us elsewhere.
Yes, that's fine. So, yeah, you know, it's
on Facebook like everybody else.
Carmine and I are not hard to find on Facebook.
No, you guys are not hard to find. Neither am I.
No, they can find us pretty easily.
Yeah, yep. So, you know, you can direct your hate mail there if you like. If not, also I do have an email address, Chuck, CHUCK72 at Lycos, which is spelled LYCOS.com.
Make it good and maybe there'll be a hate mail show.
I do have a phone call, gentlemen. So, let's see now. Caller, you are on the air.
Hey, this is not David Bonpane, but I might be able to fill his shoes for him.
All right.
Steve Rowe, how
Hey,
you guys doing?
Hey, Steve, how's it going?
This voice sounds familiar. And Steve, I'll tell you, you're not going to get fair air in the last few minutes here, but I absolutely invite you to have a debate show with any of the participants here that are willing to discuss it with you, and you can bring a partner, sir.
Okay, that sounds good, Chuck. We'll set that up near future, huh?
At your convenience, you let me know, and I will fit it into one of the live broadcast nights, and we'll do it.
Okay. Well, I just want to ask one question.
Sure.
Actually, how come you guys are ignoring the palm print on the rifle and the palm print on the bag?
Well,
that's pretty solid evidence, huh?
I don't disagree with the palm print on the rifle. With the bag, I think that there's questionable links as far as the bag because it wasn't in the primary evidence right off. But I'm not saying that it's not, that there isn't a palm print on the bag.
Mm-hmm.
He could have touched the bag. He could have touched the paper that made the bag. Now the rifle, I have never contended that it could have been his. That could be Oswald's rifle, and based on what the evidence points towards, there's a good chance it was his rifle. But once again, that doesn't mean he fired it. And that doesn't mean he had the skill to fire it.
Right. That's what I was going to say, too.
Which is why I've ignored this, and I've seen people miss regarding it, trying to make a lot of statements. The chain of custody on the lift and all that is also questionable, but not as questionable as some people like to make it seem. The possibility that his palm print wound up on that rifle, that's there, but again, it doesn't put it in his hands at the time. I point out the problems with him taking possession of it, with him receiving the delivery of it, because I think that's fair to bring up. The idea that would point to him actually having possession of it, well, it could just as easily have been achieved by somebody handing him that rifle to examine. It doesn't state exactly how that print got there either. There's more to it than just stating that there is a print or there isn't a print in my estimation, which is why I didn't bother to bring it up.
Well, if I can also add to that, and I'd say this conversely for the other side, which I don't agree with, but theoretically Oswald also could have been a spotter. Oswald could have handled the rifle. He might have been told to bring his rifle, and he gave it to the person who fired. I just think they weren't able to prove that he fired it. So there could be innocence and guilt in there to assess to him. I just don't think it's the innocence or guilt of the shots.
And I was going to say also, Carmine, that could actually also account for Jack Doherty not seeing him bring the rifle into the building.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we'll get into this a little better discussion later, but I've got several points. I can blow that out of the water. But
well, I look forward to that. I look forward to that. Steve, I really came into studying this case on your side. That's how I came into it. I wanted to disprove all of the wackiness, and you know what? I did in a lot of cases. But then there was just too much, in my estimation.
Yeah.
But I still have an open sort of mind regarding this, actually. I believe that it would be very hard to convince me at this point, but honestly, if somebody could show me a logical sort of trail where we can go from A to B to C that doesn't have, that isn't full of tons of holes, I'd be happy to, okay, Charles dropped. I thought Steve might have dropped. I'd be more than happy to switch sides and go for what I consider to be the easy answer here. Because I'm left with not knowing who's actually guilty, and I don't state that Oswald is innocent, by the way. I'm not one of those guys, that Oswald is innocent and that, that there's absolutely no way that he was guilty of anything.
Exactly. You can't with what, his own actions imply that at the very least he was used.
Right. That's how I see it. But
yeah, I understand. I'm not saying you guys are diehard type of people,
Yeah.
But we can certainly go through all that, at a later time, and go through it.
I'd be interested to know what you think about Doherty, though. That's one I always like to throw to those who
Doherty?
support the commission? Yeah. Or Jack Doherty.
Jack Doherty was in the Army Air Force during World War II, and he was approximately 40 years old in '63. He was questioned by the WC.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's certainly in the building and all that, but they did fingerprint him. They looked around for prints on the boxes in the sniper's nest. It wasn't there.
But,
and, no indication at all that he was even up there, I mean,
I think what Carmine's alluding to, Steve, is that Doherty actually stated, and I believe in a sworn statement, said that he saw Oswald enter the book depository, and Oswald was not carrying anything.
well, yeah, that's what Chuck said earlier. But also, in a statement, he said that he was working on the 5th or 6th floor.
Oh.
And then later on, they said that he had emotional problems and other things, but that he really never did question him, and he wasn't called to testify.
oh yeah,
So but in it. Oh no, Doherty was. Yeah, I'm sorry. So Doherty did testimony, but they never specifically asked him about where. They never got to where his exact location was, whether it was on the upper floors or on the lower floors.
Well, yeah, he gave a pretty bad testimony. They were confused where he was. But, he said he glanced out of the corner of the eye when Oswald came in. That doesn't mean Oswald had to walk in the building with the package.
Mm-hmm.
It came back through the loading dock. He could have very well stuffed it out there, retrieved it later or whatever, But all this we can go into further detail,
Yeah, no, we're just glad to hear you. We're more than happy to discuss the other side too, because it's not going to be, in my opinion, one side or the other. It's going to be both sides, and the most reasonable things about both sides likely working as one, conglomerated timeline.
Right. Yeah, well, I got no problem with that. It's just there's other things there that need to be discussed. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying palm print on the bag and all that stuff. The CE-399 was proven to be fired exclusive to all rifles by Fraser. So and then you got Jarman and the rest of them floor down below, hearing the shells hit the floor and everything. Somebody was shooting up there.
Well, no, I agree with that, definitely. Yeah.
I'm not disputing that either, but we don't know. I'm just saying I'm not convinced who it was.
Right.
No, I'll be willing to state that I'm certain that there's a shooter on a higher floor of the book depository building. I'm not sure if it's, which floor it is precisely, but I'm sure that based on a conglomeration of the evidence, you've got a shooter from that elevation. You've got a shooter from that direction. So that's what I figure. Now, as to what he actually struck, as to who that shooter was, these things are questionable in my mind. That's where I'm at with it.
And was he the only shooter there?
Exactly. What do you think of, because I know you've heard of some of it, Steve, what do you think of some of Sherry Feister's trajectory analysis?
I don't believe it. She's trying to do the shots from the South Knoll,
mm-hmm.
and then she's trying to interpret that over the Z film and everything like that. I mean, I just can't see how you can interpret blood splatter over a film versus an actual crime scene. To me, that's real conjecture.
Well, in part, she's utilizing the photographs that were taken by the Secret Service and the FBI of the limo afterwards, which is, is separate from the Z film. The Z film is, a Rorschach test to a lot of us. I mean, at this point, you can sort of interpret and see things in there if you want to, regarding specifics, and that's kind of the conclusion I had to come to after exhaustively going through that thing. I mean, I don't even want to tell you the amount of time, effort, and money invested into that film I have, but it's
I think
sickening. Yeah.
What were you saying, Charles?
I was just going to say that she's a trained forensic expert,
Yeah.
And the techniques that she uses are very common, actually, in that field.
Oh yeah, no, they're all approved and they're used by. I've checked out the forensic side of it. I agree. None of us are always going to agree with everything anyone says, but I agree with a lot of what she says as far as the ballistics and the trajectory analysis. I think it at least is open to possibility. It might not be 100% definitive, but I think that it at least allows us to consider another feasible possibility that could have occurred.
Yeah, well, yeah, I understand that, and but where's the bullets?
Well, then we get into the fragments. Did they not recover any of the bullets?
Now we get into a whole other area. And
what happened to the internal parts that the FBI seized of the car?
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff going on here. I mean, was there actually a strike on the turf on the other side of, of Elm? Was there? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. What exactly hit James Tate in the face?
I didn't even realize that. Yeah, this might be you might need a single bullet episode.
Yeah,
just have both sides talk about
it. There is a whole litany of problems relating to what happened to the rest of the bullets, and that's one of those things that we're just not going to have time for. I've only got a few minutes left. I did add Dylan into the discussion too. Dylan, did you have a question?
No, I really just called in to listen because the player kept going in and out.
Okay, sorry about that. But
okay, guys, I'm gonna sign off here, but appreciate it. Yeah, I still love you guys. Okay.
So, yeah, absolutely. And Steve, we will hear
You're awesome,
again.
Don't get me wrong now.
No. Hey, I love constructive criticism. It's so rare these days.
Yes. And you know what? If your answers are all correct and it turns out that you were correct, I'll be the first one to say, thank you.
Got it.
Because this is what I would like to see, is a simple, concise answer to what happened, finally.
I think it's also good to say it's nice to be able to talk to someone that has differing opinions and have it be a civil discussion and not throwing insults back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, guys, I'm going to close things out here. Thanks, Steve, for calling. And
okay, Chuck, you guys take care.
Can I get 30 seconds real quick?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Carmine.
Okay, if you're listening and you enjoyed the show, please try to stop by tpaak.com, tpaak.com. There'll be links to a lot of the people that you heard here tonight and other great researchers. There's a recommended section there. Please stop by facebook.com/neepmg, capital N-E-A-P, capital M-G. And you can find myself, Charles, Rob, Trish, Zach, everybody that's at Neapolis Media Group on the NeepMG Facebook page. Also go to the Lone Gunman podcast Facebook page, which would you just type them in, you'll find them there too. And Chuck Ochelli's Facebook page. If you'd like, stop by my writer Facebook page or Chuck's public persona Facebook page. And please, I hope you'll listen in again.
Really, and I want to thank everybody who decided to give us the time tonight, no matter what method you used, or if you caught us further on down the stream. The Ochelli Effect is what you were listening to, and this was the JFK Assassination Myths, episode number 4, discussing what we believe to be the official story and the mythology attached to it. Of course, we're going to hear from the other side on this one, and I look forward to a possible debate over these issues. So, again, thanks for tuning in, and if you want to catch any other archives, they are still available at ucy.tv/TOE, and, of course, you can find me on, YouTube, The Blind JFK Researcher, all that. Charles Cliff, I really want to thank you for stopping in, sir. Is there anywhere you want to direct people to?
Yeah, I've got, if you're on Facebook, I've got a discussion group. It's the JFK Assassination Research Bureau. And also all the other sites that Carmine mentioned, Neapolis Media Group, Lone Gunman Podcast. Highly recommend both of those as well. So.
Right, and I do, again, thank all of you guys, Rob Clark, Charles Cliff, Carmine Savastano, Steve Rowe for stopping in really quick just to make his...
Assassination.